What lessons will the Broncos apply from the first week of the preseason? We'll talk about that coming up here on a Monday night edition of Denver Football After Dark. Denver Football After Dark on this Monday night in the Mile High City, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, and other places around the world. Gonna think positively here about the Broncos coming out of the first week of the preseason. It'd be easy to say, hey, a lot went wrong. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of consternation about what transpired. And we talked about some of that very early on Sunday morning in the post-game show. But let's sort of get into it. The lessons that were learned from that preseason opener. Better to learn the lessons now than later. Better to have the hard knock stuff come now than when it actually costs you. Here on a Monday night. Broncos get back to practice, of course, on Tuesday morning. 3 more official days of training camp, as it were. One of them will be a joint practice with the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday. Technically, that's the last day of training camp, although for all intents and purposes, there are days next week. There are 3 days next week. They're not called training camp because they're not open to the public in the same way as these 3 practices are. They're typically open to sponsors. So there are people watching those practices, but it's a little more controlled in terms of who is taking in those practices. And for example, they've done joint practices like a couple of years ago. They did a couple of joint practices with the Rams, and they happened to do them during the sponsor week. And so unfortunately they weren't public practices, but there were people watching them. They just happened to be sponsors from Empower or Ford or whatever. So they're still on the camp schedule next week, even though they don't call it training camp. But they're back at it on Tuesday with some practical experience, some practical lessons, some reminders that, okay, maybe there are some things to work on. The fact that for the defense, they got beat over the top on that first possession by the 49ers on Saturday night. But it's not just that. If it were just that one series at the start of the preseason game, it would be one thing. But that the 49ers really did well against the Broncos D for the back half of that practice on Thursday. I mean, it started off with the Broncos dominating. I mean, the first team period and the 7-on-7 period, it was overwhelming. And if you'd called it off right then and there, it would have been Broncos dominance. In that regard, it was similar to the joint practice with the Packers last year, when the Broncos were getting dominated early. And if you stopped it after the first team period and the 7-on-7 period, you would have said this Broncos team was overwhelmed, overmatched, all the things. And then as the practice went on, the Broncos did a lot better. And at least on the defensive field for the Broncos, that's really what it reminded me of, except it was the 49ers this year playing the role of the Broncos last year. So the Packers turned out to be a pretty good team in the end last year and went to the playoffs. And so there's an example right there of how you can go into a practice feeling like you're about to be a very good team, a dominant team, feeling like you're going to take on the world. And then you come out at the start of the practice and you're dominant, and then it doesn't go your way the back half of the practice. And then turns out okay in the end. Turns out you're still a pretty good team. And so that's another line that's another line in the of evidence in my let's not get too caught up in too much consternation over what happened. But lessons. Okay. Broncos generated a lot of pressure on the defensive side. Lessons to be learned. Jade Baron, there was a play he was beaten for a touchdown. Vance Joseph talked last week about how one of the things for Baron is learning from mistakes because they're going to rely on him. When we've seen Baron get beat, I think back to the play that Troy Franklin made on him in one-on-ones earlier in training camp. It's not like he's getting beaten by 3 steps. The touchdown he gave up on Thursday, the play he gave up to Troy Franklin deep, these are plays where he's either right there step for step, or it's just like a half step off. He's close. I'm not as concerned about that because we're only talking about like a little tweak here, a tweak there. One thing I am encouraged about with Jade Baron is there's already something that I think is going to be a plus for him, and that is into the box attacking the run, being used on blitzes. I think that's something that right from the jump, the Broncos are going to be able to use effectively with him. That's an element in sub packages that can catch opponents off guard, and I think that's a wrinkle that is going to expand the tactical possibilities of this defense. So right there, I think that's something that's a positive that is coming out in that regard. Offensively, lessons. We'll talk about RJ Harvey. One thing, we already know he's got a lot of speed. We saw him bounce it to the outside. There were some times you bounce it to the outside out of necessity because, okay, sometimes the holes aren't there. Sometimes the holes are there for a split second. And it's actually inaccurate to call them holes as much as they're creases. We're not talking about holes that get open and stay open. There rarely are the holes big enough to drive a truck through, as the cliche goes. It's a crease that flashes open and then it's gone. In a similar vein to how the NFL quarterback coming from college has to learn that the big windows into which you throw are actually tight windows, that open in college is no longer this, it's this. The running back coming from college to the pros has to learn the lesson that before you bounce it outside, that the hole you're going to get in the NFL isn't necessarily this as much as it's this, and it's there for a second and then it's gone. So you have to be decisive and hit that crease. Bobby Turner used to always say, one cut and go. And the reason why he would say that is because that crease would flash open and you had to be decisive and make that cut and take advantage of the crease when it was there. So it's a lesson that I think he's going to learn, and I think he's going to be effective because we know he has the vision, and we know he has the quickness, and we know he has the burst. So he has all these skills. It's just a matter of applying them. Just like last year, we saw Bo Nix as he got more comfortable, apply the skills that he had naturally to the speed, tempo, and style of the pro game. So that's typically what it is for players coming from college to the pros, making the jump. It is at what point do they adjust to everything that is thrown at them in the pros, the speed, the narrowness of the windows, the narrow margins, and then when they've adjusted, their skills and ability end up coming more into play, and then they can become effective. So that's why that's why I'm not a jump to conclusions person. That's why I, sit back and wait and watch and see how these players as they come in adjust to that. And over time you find out whether they can or can't. And for some it takes longer than others. That's why you don't grade a draft for 3 years. And then for some, they adjust, and then opponents adjust to them, and then you figure out whether they can adjust back. That's more true for quarterbacks. I mean, because sometimes we see the early surge and then the adjustment back, and then you see whether they can handle that. A great example of a quarterback who couldn't adjust back was, for example, Josh Freeman in Tampa Bay about a decade and a half ago. And that's why he was a one-year wonder in 2010. Mac Jones, another one-year wonder. And no, I do not think Bo Nix is going to have the arc of Mac Jones, despite what that ESPN article suggested that, the hot take, he'll lose his job in 2027. No, I do not think that's going to be the case. What I'd like to do is actually dive into some numbers to see how many quarterbacks who had seasons like Bo Nix that ended with starting in the postseason as rookies, how many quarterbacks did that happen to? Because we know it obviously happened to good old McCorkle Jones in New England, now with the 49ers, but how many times did that really happen? What are the chances of that really happening? I'd say probably pretty slim. I'd say most of the time when you get there and get there fairly early, it tends to augur well for the future of your career. But that's something that maybe I'll do on Friday when they're not practicing. That sounds like a Friday project when I've got a couple of hours to actually dive into it. So Denver football after dark here on a Monday night here, Tuesday morning for some of you. Pack Show, you're already your favorite show. Well, thank you. Appreciate that, Mark. Bobby says, feel bad for the Cardinals. They're going to get the business end. Well, as Gary Kubiak would say, we're fixing to find out what they're going to bring. Interesting team, and always interesting when you've got a quarterback who can discombobulate with mobility, and a team that I think is one of the more low-key fascinating teams coming in here with the Cardinals, and they're going to present some different challenges than the 49ers did. And I like seeing a team like this in contrast to the 49ers. I like seeing a quarterback who's more dynamic. With all due respect to Brock Purdy, Purdy doesn't have the potential to break you down in as many different ways as Kyler Murray can. So I look forward to seeing the challenge that they're going to face on Thursday when he comes in. So it's just a different type of quarterback. I mean, yeah, we're not talking about an elite quarterback. I mean, we're not talking about Patrick Mahomes. We're not talking about Josh Allen, but stylistically talking about a different style. Somebody who extends plays more. Somebody who, to use the Sean Payton, Bo Nix verbiage, a little more of a second act quarterback. And what stress that places on your pass rush, what stress that places on your secondary. So it's good. It's nice to get that different style to see right after you go against the 49ers. So it sort of worked out really nicely, I think, for the Broncos to get Arizona after San Francisco. So I think it's pretty exciting to see them coming in on Thursday. So good night to you, May. Still weird to say that as hello. Yeah, because you can't really say good evening because we're late, right? It's night. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. I need to know what non-football thing Sean was mad about. Okay, well, first of all, I've got the soundbite queued up here. So I'm glad you brought that up, human person. So let's play that because that's been gnawing at me. I've got some thoughts here. So the 14 things soundbite from Sean Payton after Saturday night's game.
Now, there's some mistakes that are going to happen, but it's the pre-snap. It's the illegal man downfield. There's a handful of these things that those have to be cleaned up like tomorrow. So I do think it's important when we come to work tomorrow, and it's not just the players. This is the first road trip for us, and I've got 14 things written down that I'm pissed off about that have nothing to do with the game, and so that's part of the debrief too. And so the willingness of the player, employee, all of us to accept and make those corrections, I think, are important.
Okay, so do I know what exactly those 14 things are? No. I mean, you can start kind of putting things together when he says employee. And he says that, they're non-football. So, I mean, you're talking about operational type stuff. You're talking about things that are related to, could be anything from the buses, the flight, the meals, the hotel, how the equipment is arrayed in the locker room, the smoothness of transportation, the smoothness of getting the coach from the field to the press conference and then back to the locker room. I mean, there are all of these things that go into it. And NFL coaches, they are of the detail-oriented type. I mean, I don't think most NFL coaches do not reach that point without being obsessed with details. I probably can say I don't think I would have wanted to be on the business end of things. This is times like that are when I'm glad I'm sitting here in the job I have and I'm not back in that building anymore. So, I mean, for all we know, it could be someone got the latte wrong. I mean, there were all sorts of stories. I mean, I remember when Nick Saban was coaching the Dolphins, the stuff that was leaking out. I mean, that it was unconfirmed, but I mean, there were things bleeding out, like stories about Little Debbie snack cakes, and so forth. I mean, things that seemed so absurd, and yet having worked in NFL organizations in Carolina and Denver, there are some details that have gone into things that, like, you're like, is this real? And I'm like, yeah, these things are things that you wouldn't think of, things that there are things that when you're on the outside, you don't. Okay, how do I put it this way? When you get inside an NFL organization, you get institutionalized to things. It's almost to go. If you've seen Shawshank Redemption, you know about kind of being institutionalized, right? When Morgan Freeman's character Red, when he finally gets out, and he realizes he's institutionalized to the point where he can't even go pee without someone telling him to, because that's what he's gotten used to. So you are in an NFL organization and you get accustomed to things and you get institutionalized, and then you step out and you're back in the real world and you realize how absurd some of these things are that you come to accept when you're inside the building, right? Because like you realize that these things aren't normal, but they're normal inside the NFL world. There's a reason why Bill Parcells has said that this is not a sport for the well-adjusted. So that's why I say these 14 things are things that could be such mundane details that if we found out what they were, to those of us on the outside, they may seem absolutely ridiculous in nature. But on the inside of the NFL, they may seem meaningful because it's all about the little things and the sum of the little things adding up to something big. And it is very much a culture where you're trying to get every detail right, because there's the thought that every single detail can make a difference. That every little detail can get you that little bit more. If it can get you that little tiny edge that you're gonna try to maximize it, which I've always found interesting, because all the little details you can get, they're well and good, but if one side has Patrick Mahomes and the other side has, with all due respect, Drew Lock or Joe Flacco, or one of the quarterbacks, or Case Keenum, one of the quarterbacks that was around here in previous years, you're not. All the little things in the world are only going to do so much to bridge that gap, that chasm. You can get all the little things right, but maybe that's only going to close it from here to here. So anyway, that's my treatise on this. Sean didn't get his latte. Oh man. Yes, you're right. This is early compared to the previous show. Yeah, the last show was like 2:30 in the morning Pacific time because that was it. I'd like to know if RJ Harvey reminds you of Clinton Portis' first game as a pro. Like what I saw of Harvey. He's the burst is very similar. He's more compact than Clinton. So they're different types of backs. Clinton definitely more upright, angular. RJ has a little more burrowing capability. They both explode through in similar ways. I think I actually see, and I mean this in a good way, I see a little more of a faster Quentin Griffin in RJ Harvey. And you remember there was a brief moment when Quentin Griffin 22 years ago was really good on turf especially, and then he tore his ACL, and then unfortunately it was gone for him after that. But there was a brief moment, end of 2023, first game of 2024, where Quentin Griffin looked like he was really going to be special. So, and he had that explosion, he had that burst. And RJ is built more stoutly, like he's Griffin, but he's got a little more burst and he's got a little more power to him. So which is probably why you're talking about him as a second round pick as opposed to Quentin Griffin being a middle round pick. So I would say that's more of a comp I would make than Clinton Portis personally. So but I appreciate that question. Arvada Orange, I've been around long enough to know better than the panic. Firm believer in the get the BS now philosophy. First team wasn't there to play. They were there to survive. And another thing, I think that's actually a good thing about the first team kind of being there to survive. The second team coming in for the Niners was kind of jacked, and they were throwing everything out there. And I do think, especially that first series, they had, in the parlance of Vic Fangio, more oomph to them than the Broncos did. Now, there's another lesson to come back to the title of this show. A lesson, okay? If you don't have the juice, it doesn't matter if you're playing a top shelf team or second tier team, because you know what? You might face a team, and Sean Payton alluded to that. You're not always going to face like kind of a name brand group, but if they come at you with that sort of fire in their eyes, like the Niners backups did, that's going to happen. You know, the old quote from John Fox, the other guys get paid too. So, the background music. It is football. It is football. Yes. It is. But doesn't mean we can't have have the little theme music, right? And there it is again. It's called Night Driving, by the way. There you go. As I cue it up again. So, Denver football after dark here on this Monday night. Earlier, I'd like to get this to the point where it's usually at 10:30 or 11 o'clock. By the way, so I'd like to. This is hopefully going to be more of the regular time, and I think it will be, because the goal was to get in bed by around midnight most of the time. So, yeah. By the way, as some of you are pointing out, Kay Adams will be out there and at practice tomorrow, of course, doing her national show, which means I'm sure she'll have Sean Payton on, and we know there will probably be a couple of newsy nuggets that come out of that. SSP Joel, thoughts on ESPN claiming Bo will be out of starting by 2027? Well, ESPN's not claiming it. It was kind of one person, sort of a hot take thing, making a prediction in a column. And, you know, whatever. I think they were just doing that to just throw a thing out there. Whatever. Opinions are like, you know what's, everyone's got them. I don't really, I think that's why I mentioned it a little while ago. I want to actually do some research to say, okay, what are really the chances of a quarterback who had a rookie season like Bo Nix did? What are the chances of that really happening? Because I think what happened to Mac Jones has sort of kind of poisoned the well and has got everyone thinking about this. When there are more seasons, when you talk about a quarterback who had a good statistical rookie season and it ended in the playoffs, there are more seasons where that ends up leading to success if you do that as a rookie and it ends up working out. I mean, I think of, say, for example, Matt Ryan in Atlanta in 2008, or to go in the Wayback Machine, Dan Marino in 1983 with Miami. Started most of that year, and they win the division, and they were one and done in the playoffs, but Marino had a pretty nice career, I think, as we all know. Matt Ryan, Matty Ice, had a pretty nice career, as we all know. Became an MVP at one point. We saw, we don't know about Jaden Daniels yet. We don't know about Bo Nix yet. Dak Prescott got his career off to a great start. He's had a very fine career. So my early hypothesis, just going through a handful of examples off the top of my head, is that more often than not, if you're a rookie quarterback with a good season and it ends in a playoff game, Ben Roethlisberger, then chances are you're not going to be benched in year 3 or 4. It's going to be okay because it'll be 2027, be year 4. You're not going to be on the bench by then. You're going to be doing okay. So, anyway, I will later this week go and actually do the work on that Probably Friday when I have some time, because we got training camp Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and dive into that and figure that out. The other thing I want to do is I want to test Sean Payton's quarterback formula on actual quarterback prospects of the last 10 years. Because I can get the fumble data from Pro Football Focus and kind of run it through and actually start putting it all through the abaci. Is that the plural of abacus? Abaci? Or is it abacuses? Anyway, and see if it really works, because I did a little bit of work on that, on his formula, and I checked out Paxton Lynch's last 2 seasons at Memphis, and it was like, oh, on Sean Payton's formula, Paxton Lynch actually looked pretty good. So yeah, maybe this thing isn't foolproof. Oh gosh. What type of practice do we see tomorrow? That training camp practice, I don't know if it's pads on or full pads on, or if it's shells. Cecil Lammy and we discussed that. I mean, maybe they'll go shells and ramp up the full pads on Wednesday and Thursday. Maybe they go full pads and then shells on Wednesday with full pads, presumably for the Cardinals joint practice on Thursday. So, Tyler Mark asking, every run from Bidet I've seen till last season, till this preseason game, would be crazy to say that he should be higher on the depth chart. Well, I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin is listed as third, but I think with Jaleel, he's kind of in his own box, change of pace back. It's really interesting with Jaleel. The stats would not favor him because his best run was wiped out by a holding penalty. Yet, on that run, when he broke the tackle, he did the thing that he was working all off season to be able to do. He added muscle. He reported at 199 pounds, the heaviest he'd been. Added bulk. All about being able to run through contact and break a tackle. And what does he do? He breaks a tackle. That's not something he does last year. That's not a run he's able to make last year. It doesn't count in the stats because of the penalty. And yet, he had to be feeling pretty good about that because it was what he worked all offseason to do. What I said after the game, I'll reiterate here. All 4 of those running backs had something they could hang their hat on. Audric Estime makes a man miss in the open field on a reception. Tyler Bidet, just a good, solid, all-around game. The one thing he does better than the other backs is pass protection. Blake Watson is faster. Audric Estime has more power. Jaleel is shiftier, but he's kind of on his own box. And Tyler just does a lot of everything pretty well. So, I don't necessarily think the decision got easier. Blake Watson's runs were very impressive, though. I mean, I think the one who maybe did the most for his case was Blake Watson, but we'll see. Same size. He's in a separate category because, well, he's the same. He's up to 199 in terms of the weight, but he's still that smaller, shiftier type of back that Sean Payton calls a change of pace back. That's why he's kind of in his own box. And that's still what he's going, and he's up to 199. That's what he's up to in the offseason. But what happens in training camp and over the course of a season is guys typically lose weight. So when they report, they're at their peak, and then they tend to drop because of all the work they end up doing in camp. So like a player reports at 199, most of them end up kind of going back to like 197, 195, 194, just because of all the work they end up doing. For a player like Jaleel, it's probably going to be tough to keep weight on. So he probably ends up getting back body type wise to more of what he was, closer to being the 187 pound type of back, which is closer to change of pace size, not the guy who's going to be a potential every down back. That's why you're not talking about him potentially being the one who could step in for Harvey or Dobbins when they're injured. Whereas if Bidet is there and Harvey or Dobbins gets injured, Bidet could be the every down back, the every down RB1 or RB2. That's what you're asking. So that's something to consider. Stink said Jalil's too one-dimensional. They should go Bidet, as I said. That's why Jalil, you're not talking about him being in the mix to be like RB3, as in the guy who comes in for Harvey or Dobbins. That's why he's kind of in his own box off to the side. And the question on Jalil McLaughlin is, do you have a roster spot for change of pace back? It's almost like he is competing with one of those players, a young player, where Sean Payton says, I don't want to let that guy out of the building. And we know like his fear, and he's talked about this many times, his fear is letting a talent out of the building, exposing him to waivers, and they get claimed by somebody else, and then they go on to succeed somewhere. So it's almost like Jalil, as the change of pace back, to use the Sean Payton term that he used a couple weeks ago. Jalil, as the change of pace back, is being considered against an extra receiver or somebody else who would probably be inactive, but they see as somebody who has some long-term potential, and they don't want to let him out of the building and have him go somewhere else and become a star and end up beating him. That's the thing to consider. So Jalil, because Jalil is that change of pace guy, he's not really in the mix in as much as Watson, Bidet, Estime to be the guy who fills in for Dobbins or Harvey if one of them gets hurt. That's why. And in fact, when Sean Payton was talking about the running backs and what they bring, like he was answering a question about them, he just barely mentioned Jalil kind of as an aside, but he talked at more length about Estime, Watson, and Bidet, kind of breaking them down. Like just basically talking about those three, and then just sort of mentioning Jalil quickly, and then didn't say anything more about him. Almost like he was distilling the competition for RB3 to be the guy who would be there in relief if Dobbins or Harvey are hurt, down to those three. So that's the thing. And the question on Jalil McLaughlin at 199, he breaks the tackle, so that's good. Is he as quick to the edge? Has he lost a little bit? He says he hasn't lost the speed, but there were a couple of plays when he got outside and he didn't quite make as much of them as maybe you hoped he could. So did he lose a little something? That's a fair question to ask. He says he feels faster, but there was one that he swept to the edge and it looked like he had a chance to get about 6 or 7 yards, and he only got 1 or 2. So that is a fair question to ask. So best runners will emerge. It is a dog fight right now at running back. It's actually, I think, one of the best competitions on the roster. If not, it may be the most interesting competition is RB3 right now. And effectively, I think, if you kind of consider Jalil McLaughlin in his own box, it really is Bidet, Watson, Estime. Bidet is the best all around, and he's the best pass protector. The question is, does he have the highest ceiling? The highest ceiling might be Blake Watson of those three. Certainly the speed is there. We saw on Saturday how it can look. I mean, not just when he got through the crease. There was the pass that got called back on the penalty by Frank Crum where he just just made a guy miss, and he got the first down basically on his own. The dynamic element with Blake Watson, it was cool to see that actually in a game. That was the guy that I saw at the Shrine Bowl a year and a half ago in those practices. That's the prospect that I saw. That's him. That was the player that I was so excited for the Broncos to get as an undrafted free agent. Like, it was great to see that, honestly, for me personally, because I'm like, okay, that's him. That's the guy that's the prospect. That's the guy I saw. That's the one. So we've seen it. And I think Sean Payton was excited about it as well, because if you remember in the Charger game on Thursday night last year, you remember Kirk Herbstreit talking about the way Sean Payton talked about Blake Watson in the production meeting and how excited he was. So I think Sean Payton was probably excited to see that as well. I think Watson excites Payton too. So anyway, man, not sure we actually use two backs, but the point when I say every down, it's that they can be used on first, second, or third down. You're using two backs, but that they can be used in any situation potentially. That's what I'm talking about. So I'd keep Watson and Jalil be a little short somewhere else. I don't know if that works. Well, the other thing also on Tyler Bidet is, do you play the game of putting him on waivers and seeing if he gets through? Because he's passed through waivers at the cut down in 22, 23, 24. Does he go through again? Or does somebody claim him, or does somebody pick him up? That's a fair question to ask, because he's gone through waivers multiple times and nobody's picked him up. So he's passed through the practice squad. So that's another thing to consider. Now, that being said, it is a risk because anyone can claim him. It's not like he's a guy who's a vested veteran. A vested veteran, you can say, hey, we're going to put you on the practice squad, but don't worry, we're going to elevate you. And the vested veteran can say no. A player who's waived and claimed by somebody else can't say no. They have to go to the team that claims them. So that's why it's a risk if you put Bidet out there, because he would have to go to the team that claimed him. No choice. So he's had, I think Aldrich's had a good camp, Broncos football junkie. Some conflicting reports. He's had some good days. Honestly, I think all three of these running backs, in fact, of Bidet, Estime, and Watson, they've had their flashes. I would say probably of those three, in camp, the one that was probably the least notable was Bidet. But he probably had the least to prove because of what we saw from him in the regular season last year and because of his experience level. He doesn't have to do it. Estime had a heck of a lot to prove coming into camp. And Blake Watson had a heck of a lot to prove. So sometimes it's a matter of attacking training camp a little bit differently because of your experience level. I say for training camp, okay, we haven't heard Cortland Sutton's name as much as Troy Franklin's name or Pat Bryant's name. Or we haven't heard Marvin Mims's name as much as those other guys. Although we heard Mims's name a bunch on Thursday at the joint practice. Well, Marvin Mims is at a different stage in his career. Cortland Sutton's at a different stage in his career. When you get to be more of a veteran with more experience, you're attacking your preparation for the season differently versus a Troy Franklin, and you're really trying to prove yourself and advance yourself into a bigger role. When you're Cortland Sutton and you're in your 8th year and you're signing your 3rd contract, or you're Marvin Mims Jr. and you're an all-pro and you really, in the back half of last season, really consolidated your role and found your place in the offense to go along with your place on special teams. Your preparation for the season is different than somebody who's trying to find a major role really for the first time. So that's the thing. And so we talk about these practices and we talk about the guys that are making plays, and it's interesting to talk about on a day-to-day basis, but it's also the context of players are still getting ready for the season, and that's why it's important to note that, okay, just because Mims isn't making all these plays doesn't mean he's not doing what he needs to do to get ready for the season. And that's why I think it was key that that when you got to the joint practice, Mims was very involved, and then you got to the game, and Devon Vele was involved as well. So anyway. Other position group becoming very interesting is receiver. Speaking of that, yes. Decisions. Sutton, Vele, Mims, Franklin, Bryant, and Sherfield. I think you named 6 guys that are going to be on the team. And then the question becomes, the question's going to be who's on your practice squad. So we've seen some flashes in camp from guys. I almost think they're starting the process of maybe trying to hide some guys. And maybe we'll see a little more of that in the next couple of weeks. Maybe trying to hide and sneak some guys to the practice squad a little bit. And that may be something to watch. I think they would like to make sure Courtney Jackson gets to the practice squad, in part because he effectively may be your number 2 returner. So if something happens to Marvin Mims Jr., then if Mims is injured for a week or 2, then you elevate Courtney Jackson and he fills in that role. So that's, I think, a roster thing to sort of keep your eye on as you get down towards the cuts. Courtney Jackson's probably the most natural returner on the team other than Marvin Mims Jr. And that's something I think to keep an eye on as well going forward. So how many running backs make the 53 who gets the practice squad? I could see a scenario, Lonnie, where there are 4 running backs on the 53 and the other 2 still stick on the practice squad if they still want to be on the Broncos and if they go unclaimed. That's the key thing. If you waive 2 guys, they may get claimed by somebody else, or they may want to sign somewhere else. They may want to go to another practice squad. Like there's something to that. And we saw, like, for example, Jalen Virgil last year. Remember him? Broncos wanted him back on their practice squad, but he thought there was a better chance to move up and get playing time in Buffalo. So he signed on their practice squad. And that's something to consider. At some of the deeper positions, there may be players the Broncos want back on their practice squad, but they may see a better path to playing time elsewhere. I would also keep an eye on perhaps a trade, perhaps with the New York Jets. Maybe the Broncos assuring the Jets of a player that may be of a surplus here. We know, of course, about the connections, coaching-wise and executive-wise, with the Jets. Aaron Glenn is a former Sean Payton assistant. Darren Mushi, of course, the former right-hand man to George Payton as assistant GM here, now GM of the Jets. So don't be surprised if you see some guys with the Broncos end up wearing green and white when all this is done. So UNC's been off this week. I have my opinion on why, but I'll keep it to myself. I appreciate your knowledge on field eyes. Okay. Don't keep it to yourself. Tell me why. I'm curious. Tell me why you think we're off. because that's a heck of a statement. If you're going to throw that out there into the ether, tell me why you think we're off. I'm curious. Because I don't think I'm off. If you're going to lob that hand grenade into here, I want to know why you think we're off. Be sad to lose Blake Watson to another team. Well, you might. You might lose them. You might lose these guys. That's just what happens. That you can't keep everybody. There are probably 60 players of NFL quality here, which is good. It's a good problem to have because there are, you go back, say, 3 years, 4 years, there were probably 48 or 50. I think there were some years where the Broncos probably could have kept maybe 50 or 51 and just filled the roster with waiver claims. There was a year I covered the Panthers where they literally kept 2 guys short on. There are 2 guys short on the roster. Like I think it was 2009, they kept 2 guys short. So he isn't on the field like you are. I think he's a little jealous. Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, like off rhythm. Oh yeah, we just disagree on some things. Like, oh yeah, like I know what you're talking about, by the way. Now I get it, Cowboy Joe. He thinks Jaleel McLaughlin's a lock. Like he's saying 99.5%, and I'm not sure he's a lock. I've had him in Sharpie before. I don't have him in Sharpie anymore. I think that's what you're talking about. So I think I get what you're saying now. That we don't agree, we're not in accord on some things right now. So I get that, but that's okay. It's what makes the show dynamic. I don't think it's good if we agree on everything all the time. So I thought you meant we were off on like how we're seeing things. Like, no, I mean, I'm not saying I see everything correctly. There are some things I miss. I know I miss some things. I'm not perfect. So anyway, but I get that. I do get that. I do. But here's the thing on Cecil not being in Santa Clara. Like, I don't want to take you too inside baseball very much. And Cowboy Joe, I love you too. Especially being Cowboy. I hope if that's Wyoming Cowboy, we really love you. Like, if the initial plan was for Cecil to be in Santa Clara and for us to do the show out there together, but sometimes plans change, and that plan had to change, and I know he wasn't happy about that, but it's, that's okay. We just have to roll with the punches, but I know we missed him out there, so. Do you think Benito's camp will try to wait to get a bigger contract? Ooh, that is the one thing that I keep coming back to. It takes 2 sides to make a deal, and the potential benefit, it is a risk, because if he gets hurt, if he gets injured and misses a season, I mean, you're an ACL tear away from this being a disaster. Let's knock on the surface. We don't want that to happen, but there is a risk. But if he has a 15-sack season, he is at least in Max Crosby contract territory. And, I mean, you're talking about $8 million per year in APY, average per year. I mean, that's a huge bump. To say nothing of the increasing guaranteed money. So he may have people in his camp saying, okay, that's maybe something you go for. At the same time, the Broncos have to know that the price is going to go up, so does their price have to go up? The other thing is you're talking about a price tag that is, it's going to make him much more expensive than Pat Surtain. We're already talking about Zach Allen with an APY figure that's taken him, north of Pat Surtain and now Nick Benito. Now, that's just the way things work when, the bar keeps going higher on these contracts. Just wait until, if Bo Nix flourishes, wait until we talk about that contract. Whew. Appreciate you, that studio cat, man. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this for reps, and I'm doing this because I enjoy talking with you guys. And appreciate you, Lonnie. Thank you. Doing this for the time, the reps, the fun, to keep my brain sharp here in the wee small hours of the morning. Crosby is feared. Is Benito as feared around the league? Another season like last year, he will be. One season, not yet. Another starts to happen. That's the thing. You got to stack it a little bit, but he's getting there. He's starting to earn that respect. So it's coming. It's coming. More games like he had down the stretch last year, we start talking about it. More games like that Colt game. Like, think about more plays like he had against, on the touchdown there. More game-breaking plays, more game-breaking moments. That's the sort of thing that makes you feared. That's the sort of thing everybody takes notice of. So, Craig Hart, you better be getting enough sleep. I'm going to get my 7 hours. Actually, somebody asked me about that on social media, and I said I'm actually pretty good at getting my 7 hours when it's not training camp, because I usually set my alarm for about 8:45 or 9 in the morning, so I'm usually good about getting my 7. Training camp is the one time I struggle, but I will probably be in bed at about 12:30 Mountain Time, so about 35 minutes from now, and then I'll be good, and then I'll get my 7+ hours and be ready to go for training camp in the morning. So, totally different type of player than Crosby. Yep, totally different type. But edge rusher, but they're different types of guys. I mean, Crosby, a little more power to his game. Benito, a little more guy who can operate in space. He can drop back in coverage. That's okay. So, are you going to keep doing After Dark through the preseason? Yeah, I plan to. I plan to keep this up during the season, actually. If this is going pretty well, I mean, it's actually given me some other ideas that are floating through my head. So when I get out of training camp, there are a couple of things I'm going to float past, and they may be on the Denver Sports Channel as well. So there may be something extra on the Denver Sports Channel, and of course, I'll keep doing this here on my channel. So there's just some things I'm floating around. So. Post-game After Dark would be sweet. Yeah, they'll hopefully not as late as the one from San Francisco, but I do plan to do post-game After Darks for the most part. I'll tell you in advance, I will probably not do a post-game After Dark for New Orleans, even though that's a day game, because I've got a kind of tight schedule on that, with some personal stuff afterward. So I don't know if that's going to allow me to do an After Dark that day. So I will do one after Arizona. That's actually easy because it's a home game. So I come home, do the after I write, do the After Dark, and then go to sleep, and then get up and do a Rockies game the next afternoon. So I'm all good there. But I don't think, the New Orleans game, I'll just warn you, there will probably not be an After Dark that game. But anyway, so as we approach midnight here in the Mountain Time zone, and who do I work for? No, I don't work for the Broncos. I have not worked for the Broncos in nearly 6 years. I work for Denver Sports and denversports.com. It's also, we have the radio station 104.3 The Fan. I don't do that much on the radio. I occasionally pop on. I actually was on the Dover and Cecil show for an appearance last Friday. I sometimes pop on with Dan Jacobs on the weekends. Seems like I'm on every other Saturday or Sunday with him. But most of my work is basically digital. Try to write a story or two every day. One of the things I do is a short recap of every Rockies game. So no matter where I am, whether I'm at the game in person, and I will have ended up going to 50 Rockies games in person by the end of the year, in the press box, and I get down to the clubhouse whenever I can after a game, or sometimes I'm in the press box and I write a story and I go home. But I get to as many Rockies games as I can. But sometimes it's over television, sometimes it's in person, and I write a recap of the game. So I do a little writing on that, and then I write training camp recaps during camp. I write a post-game story after games, and then we get into the season. I'll usually write like a story or two from the locker room, from interviews and that kind of thing. And that's at denversports.com. And so I do work there, and then on the Denver Sports social channels and YouTube and that sort of thing. So that's really, denversports.com is where most of my work ends up residing. So that's basically it. So 2 a.m. in Syracuse, New York, home of the Orange, home of Otto the Orange. So, yes. How great would it be if the Walton Penner Group Walmart bought the Rockies? Oh, the number of times I have heard people say or tell me that is what they wish for. If I had I'm not saying it's a lot, but I'd say if I had $1 for every time that I've had that told to me, I would have $200. So, not an insignificant amount. I think people, and I say this, people would like to see them own a team in a sport that didn't have a salary cap. I think the one thing that prevents the Walton Penner Group from doing all they can with the Broncos is that darn salary cap. Well, in baseball, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You do have a luxury tax, though. I mean, I don't think they'd be the Mets or the Yankees. This wouldn't be or the Dodgers. This wouldn't be Steve Cohen here. But I think they'd at least be the Phillies, perhaps, or the Padres. Which would be exciting. Which should be fun. So, all right. I'm going to wrap this up here so I can get my sleep in advance of practice. Back to practice on Tuesday for your Denver Broncos with some lessons learned and applied from their trip to the San Francisco Bay Area, their trip to Silicon Valley with the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe a little more humble, perhaps. I don't think they need any humility, at least not the players. I think maybe everybody kind of before we start talking about Super Bowl, let's start talking about getting to 1-0. Being a good team. Taking care of the things on the checklist in front of the Broncos. Getting Bo Nix off to a good start. Getting the season off to a good start because they were 1-5 2 years ago. They were 0-2 last year. Let's get this season off on the right foot this time. That, I think, is a good way to start this. The steps in front of you right away, and then start looking over the horizon. That's my thing. Hold our horses. That's a good way of putting it. Home field advantage for the Rockies. Yes, I agree. Thank you. Actually, the thanks are all from me to all of you for watching this, whether you're watching this live or in the morning or the afternoon or whenever you're watching this on delay. I appreciate it. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you enjoy this. If you know somebody that you think would enjoy this kind of show, let them know about it. Let them join the conversation. Check this out here on YouTube and or on Twitter or X or whatever. And by the way, I still call it Twitter because HBO Max went back to being called HBO. So that's why I'm going to keep calling it Twitter, because eventually I still think it'll go back to being Twitter. I'm going to be stubborn on that one. So appreciate you joining me here on this Monday night and a Tuesday morning in the beautiful Mile High City, the Queen City of the High Plains at the base of the Rocky Mountains. Until Tuesday, voices will carry. Signing off here, it's your friend Mace talking Broncos, talking other things, and hope you have a very pleasant Tuesday wherever you are, and enjoy your day. And I'll be back to talk Broncos football in about 24 hours or so. So Take care. Thanks for watching, and have yourself a great day.